Once upon a time, before time even began, when people lived in misery and sorrow because the moon and sun and stars were all locked away, like gems too precious to be wasted on mortals, Raven, who loved glittering things, stole all the celestial treasures away. He tossed the sun up into the sky and its joy and its beauty, and when the sun set, he fastened the moon and hung up the stars one by one so he could always look upon them. Of all his treasures, Raven loved the stars most of all, because of how they shimmered, always out of reach. So much fainter, so much more delicate than the burning embrace of the sun, than his pale kiss of the moon. And so the bird, as selfish as the long night humans had lived in, gave them light for no other reason than beauty, for no other reason than joy. Fakir repeated the tree's words. Only when a winged princess calls out of the darkness, another from memory to memory, a newborn story arises from the ashes of old, will stone return to flesh, art to life. They were in Duck's hospital room, which had somehow become the center of their operations. Duck lay propped up against the pillows, Rue sitting beside her on the bed, and Mythos standing nearby. Fakir leaned against the window, his back against the glass, and Artur, thumbing through the stacks of books which still littered the floor, sat in Fakir's usual wooden chair. Fakir continued, explaining what they had uncovered about the curse, how quickly it was spreading, and the only way they had learned to counteract it. We don't even know what the blasted ravens have to do with this, he finished with utter disgust. They're newborn, Mythos suggested. Artur was no longer listening at all. Given all the pieces of the mystery that they had gathered so far, it was a wonder to see how Bookus the musician had made a sense of them. His thoughts were so rapid, so fluid, so fully engaged in fitting together the different fragments. It almost felt like he could see the ideas themselves flit across his eyes. I wonder, Artur murmured, at least more to himself than the others, if ravens, like words, are what you make them, you can fasten them to despair or into tricksters. He seemed to shake himself out of his reverie and added more loudly, I've learned better than most that words don't just have one meaning. Perhaps we've been looking at the wrong raven, or only part of it. I've had enough riddles for one day, Rue said dryly. Hugin Immunin, Utter responded in answer, and the irritated look she shot him, he expanded. The raven's thought and memory that perch on the soldiers of Odin. They fly out at dawn and bring him news of the world. It's an old story. Drosselmeyer cast the ravens so completely as an antagonist that I had forgotten that there are other possibilities. He dug through the stacks of books, pulling up one with a dull cover, time and use having worn away the golden words of the title. I always feared that thought might not wing its way home, but my fear for memory is greater. He read aloud, as the desk clear up in confusion. Mythos frowned, baffled. I thought they were ravens of dark emotions, expelled from my kingdom. Oh, they are, Artur assisted him, setting aside the book and adjusting his glasses. But they nested thoughts and memories. Having been expelled from their own homes, they made new ones in the long-buried memories of the people of Goldcrown. If they nested memories, then, Ruhr considered, first we must release the ravens from people's hearts before we can awaken their memories. Fakir, who had been silent until then, asked, And all that gibberish about the stories? Artur's eyes positively lit up. Don't you see? It's all about the materiality of the text, its physical existence. The old story itself can't be preserved, but it can be given a concrete part in making the new. What are you talking about? Fakir lashed out, utterly at the end of his patience. Ashes! Ink! And at the continuing incomprehension and frustration in the other's face, added, You were always a bore. Light black is one of the key components of certain inks. Artur explained as explaining to a small child. We simply use the ashes of the old manuscript to make the ink out of which you will write the new story, the old giving birth to the new. Can it really be as simple as that? Rue asked. We gather the ashes, and you write a story with this ink, and their memory is returned? No, Fakir answered grimly. We all know it is as simple as that. He walked to Duck's side and brought up the point none of them was to talk about. had been avoiding it industriously in the hope that somehow ignoring it would render it unnecessary. The winged princess, who dances at the center of it all. Duck lay there silently, not having the energy to even argue with Fakir, convinced him that her choice was that there was no other choice. She couldn't leave everyone like this, frozen under the weight of what they could not remember. Not when she herself knew how painful it was. There can be no other. Arthur agreed reluctantly, trying with all his logic to come up with another solution, and failing. She must untangle fantasy from reality. She must dance and call out the ravens. She must dance and awaken the memories as you write. The story will magnify the effects, so she won't have to do so for each individual, but... Fakir looked down at Duck as she laid against the pillows, her face almost as pale as the sheets, pleading with his eyes for her to reconsider. But she would not meet his gaze. In a moment of tense silence, stretched taut, and finally snapped as Fakir stalked down the room. Fakir! Duck called out in a faint voice, but it was too late. He was already gone. Rue took one look at the distressed expression on Duck's face, and with a hasty, "I'll help her collect the ashes," she followed after him. "Leave me alone," he said in a dull voice when he realized Rue was following him. "The bookstore is in the other direction." "Go away, you damned raven witch!" he barked, hoping to anger her and to leave him alone with his sorrow. "We have to collect those ashes, or will you not help her at all?" she asked in a cutting tone that suggested she known that she was right about him all along, that he was a selfish bastard who did not account for anyone else at all. She hardly thought so ill of him any longer, but goaded him all the same, knowing exactly what to say to get under his skin, as much as she had when they had been children. For though she could sympathize with his anguish, they had a task in hand, and could not waver from it, Fakir least of all. And with unerring precision, Rue had struck at the one thing that could make him set aside his anger. Princess Tutu was the ballerina destined to dance alone until she finished. That was the fate Drosselmeyer had written for her, the fate Duck had accepted without a thought for herself. It was the fate he had tried and failed to change by making a promise to stay beside her forever. And now, when at last it had become reality, he would not walk away, and not make her carry the burden or dance this dance alone, even if it hurried her to the end. Silently he turned and followed Rue. They walked silently through the eerie stillness of the town, both lost in thought. Fakir in his self-reincarnations, and Rue in thought of Duck. Rue knew that Duck had sacrificed her all for her, Mythos once. Rue would not let her do so a second time. She would not sit by and watch Duck resign herself to this fate, and a determination for her friend and strongest love for Mythos settled in her heart. They entered the darkened building, threading their way to the back room which had become the unlikely crypt of the descendants of Drosselmeyer's executioners. Rue pulled down the curtain from the window, and quietly began gathering the ashes from the grate, placing them into the cloth. The face was clear and expressive as the soot covered her hands and dusted her clothes. But she continued her task without hesitating. "I swear I'll do everything in my power, in my blood, to keep her safe," she said with quiet conviction, before turning her sharp, unforgiving gaze on him. "So you make sure you write her a happy ending." He met her eyes briefly, as if to ascertain where he could rely on her. Finding a fierceness there he could trust, he knelt down to help her, and they finished the task in silence. Fakir, reluctantly admitting that he would not be able to concentrate on writing the story if he was with them, agreed he would write in the library. Artur was already there, preparing the ink and paper, while the others would head to the center of the town, where the greatest concentration of statues were to be found. "Fakir!" Duck tried again, as he helped her into the wheelchair once more. His eyes were covered by his hair, and he had not spoken a single word to her since he and Rue had returned with a bundle of ashes tied in an old curtain. I can't just leave them," she trailed off, even though a small selfish part of her wished there was another way. "I'll be there the entire time," he said softly. His gaze at last meeting hers was tender and pleasing. "I'll be with you, writing. So, don't you dare do anything more stupid than you have to." She smiled up at him at that, one of her blinding, heartfelt smiles, full of so much carefree innocence and pure joy. It made her heart jolt painfully. "I won't be afraid then," she swore. "As long as you're with me. With you beside me, I can do anything." He hoped, desperately, that this promise to stay by her side wouldn't end as the last one had. Duck, Rue, and Mythos stopped at the center of town, staring at the statues in disbelief. Heavy, dark clouds had overtaken the sky, casting the entire town in shadow. And in the strange half-light, the pale marble statues seemed almost to glow, as if there was some mad sculptor's dream. Dozens upon dozens of perfect marble figures caught in all the movements of everyday life. Only a handful of people remained, and he walked around as if in a dream, not seeing the statues until one happened to block their paths. Meanwhile, back in the library, Fakir sighed, eyeing the black sheep before him unhappily. "That is all you could do for her now," Arturo said behind him. "I've done all I could as well, and trying to learn to be content with that." Fakir picked up the quill. The pendant eased her pain as much as it could. He began, grunting a little as some of her weariness and pain struck him, but he held the quill stubbornly with now aching fingers and continued. This is one of the things I loved about the series was that it talked about characters and how they see themselves in the story that we're writing. We always take time to focus on our control over the characters, but we forget that we give these characters life. We give them personality. So thus, we need to understand if these characters are okay with what we're doing. There's a reason why I always roll my eyes when somebody out there says, "I can't believe you're crying over a fictional character." I feel like going, yeah, that means the writer did his job. These characters are meant to jump out the screen. We are meant to relate and see these as actual people. If you fail to make Gus understand these characters or make them feel alive, then you failed as a writer. And you also fail as a reader. In her chair, Duck tried to ignore how heavy her limbs felt. And as before, the pendant had felt her a soft storm light, taking away some of her pain. She prepared herself to rise from the wheelchair and transform. "No." Mythos stopped her with a raised hand. Suddenly, she looked down with questioning eyes. He looked down at her small, bundled figure. "We will find a way," he insisted adamantly, seeing just how frail, how ashen she still looked. Each individual freckle standing out against her blanched skin, and remembering how easy she had crumbled after she had danced to draw Arturo out the stone. It had been much of his words their insistence. "We will find another way," he repeated, and became the prince he was, taking on the form of Prince Siegfried, dressed in royal purple and purest white. The sun emblazoned on his chest. "My sword can cut through hearts without injuring those it pierces," the prince continued, drawing the swan-hilted blade. "Perhaps I can release the ravens from the statues. They are, after all, of my kingdom and my responsibility." Fakir sat back, surprised at the direction the story had taken. But after a moment's pause, he once more took the quill and ink. Arturo prepared and continued, writing out what Mythos had wished. Spinning the thread, Mythos had tossed it into the current of events, thanking the prince silently in his heart. The prince did not care if it would take him an eternity, freeing a raven from the heart of each and every statue. But if he could lighten the burden of the girl who... Mythos approached the statue of a young man selling flowers at his cart, forever frozen with a rose stem in his fingers for a long-vanished customer. The prince raised his sword carefully, gently to the floor of the stone breast. The flawless marble parted, and Mythos cleansed the raven hidden within. But the bird called petulantly, refusing to move from its nest within the statue's heart. Soon the marble had covered it once more. He tried again and again with different statues, but although each time the stone parted evenly and easily, he could not coax the ravens out of the memories of which they had gone to roost. A duck, though she was grateful to Mythos for trying to protect her, braced herself to rise, to dance. But Rue, squeezing the small hand that laid on the armrest of the wheelchair reassuringly, stepped forward before Duck could. No, she would not let Duck shoulder the weight of all their happiness by herself once more. I know something of ravens and darkness, she said. Raven's blood still within me. The heritage I tried desperately to flee gives me the power to become Princess Karehi. But I will not be ruled any longer by my own shadows. I will rule them. And so saying, she stepped forward onto the stage the story had created for them. A town square, exquisite marble statues all about them. Not torturous briars tearing her skin with agony, but a flurry of black, silken feathers materialized, enveloped Rue. When the swirling feathers parted, the soft ebony down drifting away on the wind. Before them stood the Princess of Ravens in all her glory and majesty, wild and fierce and free. Her arms spreading open like an elegant black swan landing, her body gracefully slid into the seemingly endless series of flottations droite. She spun again and again as if it was the most natural movement in the world, turning sharply but fluently in her black-toed shoes. Her dance at once powerful, at once enthralling. She danced the dance of the raven, her arms outstretched and raised as claws, but they were more playful than menacing. A faint smidge of darkness rose on the horizon. As soon a small flock of fledgling ravens came flying toward her from the academy as if answering her call. The birds flocked to her, dancing out behind her, all of them together, darting with swooping, sketching figures like wings at her back. She held one arm out to Mythos. Will you dance with me, my prince, even as I am? Mythos stood unmoving, stunned when Princess Kriay first appeared at the fateful stage. And yet there was a teasing smile as she curved at him, the horrible look in her wine-red eyes, as even now she steeled herself for his rejection, and this form was as much part of her as her love for ballet. He seized his sword and reached for her outstretched hand. And together they danced. The fairy-tale prince and the princess of ravens, a pas de deux that sketched their love for each other, a dance born out of the desire to protect the girl who had sacrificed all her own happiness for theirs before. Auteur, reading over Fakir's shoulder, exclaimed, Just what is going on out there? Did they even listen to the plan? What kind of interpretation is this? Although I suppose the ravens are flying about her like wings, and she is calling out to the darkness. But Fakir merely continued writing, the nib of his pen racing across the paper in a dance of its own. About them flocked ravens more and more, flying out of all the hearts, stone and flesh, where they did not belong. Saphir! What? So far, we've probably began every single word with almost every single letter of the alphabet we could by now. I figured we might as well use the Z word at this point. Duck watched in awe as Rue and Mythos danced. She thought again, as she had the first time she had seen them dance, that they made such beautiful, perfect couple. And somehow, unbidden, the thought crossed her mind that she could dance with Fakir. It would be a disaster. Although he was just as skilled as Mythos, she herself was as clumsy as she had ever been. Did that mean she and Fakir weren't a perfect couple? Will I ever make a fitting partner for him? The small but insidious voice of doubt crept into her mind. And with that doubt came the fear that she might never find out the answer to this question. For without the pendant help, she could not ignore the way her body ached and trembled from pain and exertion. A weak part of her whispered that this stage on which he wrote, and upon which she would dance, might mark all the time she would ever have with him. And while she had been lost in oppressive thoughts, more and more ravens flocked about the dancing prince and princess, wild and chaotic. Dark emotions you may be, said the princess of ravens, addressing the birds that had come to pay her court. But I have learned, coming here again, that it is impossible to live without shadows. If you try to run away from them, you become nothing but a shadow of yourself. Won't you return to us, to your true homes? My subjects have lived without you for far too long, Mythos added. Will you not fly home out of these nests of memory, where you have no place, and back to the hearts where you belong? But the birds seemed not to heed their words, and continued to circle the dancing pair, eyeing the prince and princess cautiously for having been thrust out of their true nests once the ravens were unwilling to trust blindly. In a circle of dying raven wings, Duck caught a glimpse of the prince and princess's faces, their expressions growing troubled as the dance continued. But the ravens, all save the few that had been caring for the past few days, kept their distance, as if sensing the budding uncertainty in the people's hearts. Ravens began to break away from the flock as the pull of their newfound nest called out to them, pulling them back into the townspeople's memories. "Oh no!" Duck gasped as he saw all of Rue and Mythos' hard work begin to unravel, her hand instinctively reaching for the pendant at her throat. She stood up, her vision blackening around the edges at the sudden movement, and waited for the jewel's light to wash over her so she could reach her friends. But nothing happened. Duck froze where she stood, unable to believe that the stone had failed her. "The pendant, but why?" Her fingers tightened around the stone, desperately wishing it would transform her into the ballerina who could dance for everyone's future. But even as she thought the words, a voice added, "Everyone's future but her own." Leaking both physically and emotionally, Duck fell to her knees onto the unwieldy cobblestones, her hands still grasping the stone as she remained merely, a girl. The ravens flew over the girl as they began to make their way back into the townspeople's buried, forgotten memories. Would she fail them all, even after the prince and princess tried so hard to protect her? Would she betray their trust and faith in her? Would she deny the townsfolk their future just so she can have hers? A future she didn't even think she deserved? Fakir gritted his teeth as the helplessness in Duck's heart pulled at his own through the link created by the pendant. Each shard of her doubt burning like ice in his veins, leading to the same despair that had given birth to the darkest night. "No! You mustn't!" Fakir whispered through clenched teeth, his quill and story forgotten. Only Atura's voice, reading over his shoulder, called Fakir back to himself. "What are you doing? Write to her, damn it!" Atura shouted, pressing Fakir's nerveless fingers around the battered quill. "You can't let her despair pull you into yours. You have to lead her out of it!" Fakir closed his eyes, pushing away that overwhelming darkness that he knew too well from what saved him from it before. Memories of Duck, the memory of her blue eyes, as clear and endless as a summer sky before him. His ink-stained fingers pushed the quill in his hand forward once more. The writer who had once been a knight, with a sword and heart as dark as midnight, called out to the girl who had given him back light. "I won't let this story end this way." And with those words, he gave half his strength, half his life to her so she would not burn out all of hers, while he wrote as he danced for her future. For their future. Fakir slumped over the desk tiredly as the words took effect, his strength seeping out of him. Doggedly he continued writing. Their love, two shades of crimson now entwined, as what gave physical form to Princess Tutu. For the winged princess, she must believe in him, and herself as well, for he will always believe in her. She must have hope in their future together. Duck opened her hands when she felt the pendant radiating a familiar warmth. At first, she could not place this feeling, but as the echo of Fakir's words reached her, she recalled this warmth. It was the comfort of his embrace, the concern in his eyes, the scalding of his tears. She felt energy flood into her. Limbs that had felt leaden and unable to sustain the exacting movements of ballet, even with the previous help of the pendant, that felt lighter, stronger. Fakir was risking so much for their future, she could not do any less. Rubbing her fingers around the pendant once more, Duck held the egg-shaped jewel close and lifted herself from the ground. She stepped forward, towards the prince and princess, dancing desperately still. The foot that touched the ground was clad in a satin toe shoe. Lifting her face, Princess Tutu reached out to the memories the ravens had found, buried deep in the hearts of the townsfolk, and danced for them, stretching her wings wide. The light that spread from her called to the ravens in their love of glittering things, and halted in their flight back to the townspeople's memories. "Remember," Princess Tutu implored the people of Gold Crown with each step she took. "Remember all the people and the memories you've lost, for even the smallest one is too precious to lose," she pleaded, remembering her own pain at all she had forgotten, for even she had lost the memories themselves. The pain and loss persisted.
Because the past is as present as the future, and you can't have one without the other. Like light and shadow, they can only exist together.
You must come back to the kingdom of too much light. Cray implored the ravens, her certainty returning with Tutu's words. Without you, all that light has no meaning. Without you, my people cannot be whole. The prince and princess, once as the ravens, now guided by their unwavering hearts, glittered once more around them in the town square, now swooping and joining them in their dance, beginning with the fledglings that they had cared for. One by one, then two by two, in ever-increasing numbers, ravens began flying upward in an arc out of Gold Crown and into the sky. Fast spreads of ravens' wings breaking through the dark clouds that had hovered over the town ever since the curse of the story had befallen it. Sunlight streaked down into the town and its inhabitants. With their wings, the ravens freed the sun, and it showed down once more on Gold Crown. Piece by piece, under the touch of the sunlight, the statues thawed from stone to flesh. The townsfolk, flesh and blood once more, drifted into sleep, drowsily curling up on their vendors' carts, restaurant tables, and even on the cobblestones themselves. Now, you see, bride, child, son-in-law, discord, this is how you do it. And the same goes for that other factor. This is how you really do a finale. Out of darkness, they followed a great white bird. Fakir wrote so rapidly the ink was in danger of smearing, but he did not care. With the last word written, he threw aside the quill, grabbed a sheet of papers, and bone weary as he was, danced out of the library, a door just behind him. Mythos caught Duck as she fell, too tired to even maintain her transformation, now that the strength of Fakir had left her, during the course of the story, had ebbed away. Rue helped Duck adjust herself onto the wheelchair. Duck closed her eyes as all her twinges and aches came back once more. Without the flowing words from his quill to act as a link to Duck, fear and dread followed at Fakir's heels as he ran toward the town square. She can't be. She isn't! Fakir stuttered out, unable to voice the horrible thought when he had caught sight of them. But Duck's eyes fluttered open. As he heard his voice, he smiled. Fakir! He knelt before her chair and held her close, burying his face into the curve of her neck. And he felt her words, quite a quivering of her body as she heard him.
The story,
She asked.
is it finally over?
Yes, he answered against her skin, reassuring himself as much as her. And you're still here, with me. Oh, it's not the end, folks. We got an epilogue chapter.